explaining intonation. It's an important requirement from a linguist, a phonetician, or a phonologist that they must be able to explain intonation. Let me start with a complexity in order to just describe intonation. That we cannot neatly describe intonation, like as neatly as we can describe the allophones of a consonant, right? Or just the patterns of stress, right? That's a problem with intonation. But yes, there are various, ways through which we can, with a possible description, we can go and explain intonation, all right? And one more important point about intonation, that intonation is always relative. There might be a person who speaks like with low pitch, low intonation, but his or her, patterns of intonation would be relatively applied. And there could be a person who speaks like with higher, relatively higher pitch, or like with relatively higher intonation, then the variation in intonation or pitch would be relatively applied. And that's the ability of human being, that we can predict and we can just comprehend such intonations in relative formation. Okay, so these were the points. And now explaining intonation. Intonation is very simply the pitch variation applied at sentence level. Okay, and then the description of intonation. We need to know that how is the pitch varying in a sentence, what variations are there, right? And where is the stress syllable, and where is the stress word, okay? Word basically, because we are concerned with word. And then what sort of major changes are taking place, okay? We also need to know the tonic accent, like the pitch peak, right? Through which we would determine that what's the intonational pattern of the sentence. So there are a few examples, and within these examples, I'm starting with the sentence, we know the new mayor, right? So within this sentence, if you just see that this is actually the length, and this is roughly a length of 500 millisecond, okay? Not really important, this length here, but just to let you know that what is given here. The upper curve, this line, it's basically showing us the intonation of a British speaker, okay? And this is the curved line, which is of an American speaker. And this data is based on the real life data, because it was taken in a CD, and it's taken from your book by Leda, Fogg and Johnson. You can read it there, but I'm explaining it here. If you just analyze that what is here in this sentence, we know the new mayor. So this is showing us the stress, okay? Because there is the stress mark given before no, right? And then the mayor, there is the asterisk, which is given here, right? The star or the asterisk, basically. So what is here? If you can just see this pattern, we know this is the stressed word here, right? And then there are some variation, first falling and then going up. And then this is the final peak, which is actually, the accent, okay? Basically, before the end of this sentence, we know that this is something, important, right? And then there is the falling behavior, right? Because this is going low in both the American and the British. There are some differences, right? But overall, the patterns are the same, because there is one peak, and this peak is important, right? Because this would determine that whether it's a high peak or a low peak, right? And how it is behaving in this sentence, right? Now, if there is some new information given, right, then this final, pattern, it can go back. Like in this example, okay, we know the new mayor, and the new, since it's the new information, that's an important point, that how the new information is given. And this is, if you just see here, that we know the new mayor. That's the most prominent point, okay? And this is something which is giving us the new information because the mayor is new, right? So that's been made the peak of the tone here, right? The accent which is at the peak, right? And this analysis of the peak accent is really important. And if you see, there is some variation in the case of, the American intonation. In this part of the phrase, there is comparatively a little variation in the case of British speaker, right? And then, just for the sake of your understanding of international pattern, that in the case of American, it goes quite, high, right? Relatively, if this space is measured, right? And then it's coming steadily in comparison with the British speaker, because British speaker might be a little bit smoothly, right? So these are, the differences between the old sentence, old information, and then when there is some new information, okay? And now there could be an utterance in which two international phrases are there, right? Two international phrases. And in the normal written language, these small vertical lines, this shows the international, the international boundary, because there is one international phrase ending here, but there is some more part of it which is remaining, okay? This show us that the utterance is not yet finished, okay? Which is normally written in comma in the orthography, right? Like the normal text. But in the international pattern, when we come in, right? So there is gap. This gap is basically because the rise is there. And this rise shows that there is something more to follow, right? So listen more, right? And this is in both cases, in the British and the American, both cases, this rise is important, right? And that's the boundary which is given here, all right? And then we had dinner. So again, the peak, because that's the accent, the most important accent in the phrase, it is there. Just for your understanding that in this case, when two international phrases are there in one utterance, you see that the American international pattern is quite, high, right? And very much variation is there in this part of the intonations, right? Same is the case with it. And these are the, dialectical differences, which can also give us some more information about the international patterns. So these were a few examples regarding the analysis of intonation and international patterns.